I'm going to get into the middle of this very quickly because my battery is running down and I'm in Warsaw, so I don't have a backup battery in the room. Also, I'm in a castle, at least that's what I'd call it. It's an apartment on Old Square, Old Town Square in Warsaw, on about the third floor looking out. And it's very, very, very high ceilings, and there's kind of drapes, not only on the windows, but actually between, like, the area I'm in, which would be the kitchen, sitting room area, and then there's a hallway. And instead of there being a door, there's a huge arch and drapes all around it like a castle. So, very beautiful place to be, and wasn't expensive, I can tell you. The price of Booking.com or Airbnb in Warsaw, probably during the winter, is cheaper than what you'd spend on Boardnamona turf in my studio in the hills above Loch Allen. And I've been coming to Warsaw for about 10 years, up until COVID. I used to come sometimes and spend 8 weeks here, and I would start with blank pages, and at the end of it I would have a very rough first draft of a book. So I would do really about 30,000 words, and that would be about maybe 4,000 words a day. And that'd be 2,000 in the morning and 2,000 in the evening. You go for a walk in between and have a bit of lunch or a bit of dinner. And you'd go home and you'd have, as I said, a rough draft of a book, about 30,000 words, and that would expand gradually over 6 months into the full length of the book. And in that situation, why I liked coming here was solitude is a great thing, right? And I talk a lot in the past 6 or 12 months about solitude and how the language of faith can be like a rudder through the silence. That's all faith is. You know, I find that if I started to take faith as some kind of alternative reality, you know, the language of Christian faith, if I started to think these things in sort of a realistic way, I would go kind of mad or unwell. And I think that the way that they are to be used is at the deep imaginal level. They are metaphors for the deepest sense of my being, how I am in the world at the deepest level. That can only, as far as I'm concerned, be expressed in terms of metaphor and in terms of religious language. And I listened to there's a woman called Helwa, or A. Helwa. Now, A is her first name initial, and Helwa is the way she spells her second name. And she has a book called Secrets of Divine Love, and to listen to it on audio is a very, very comforting and interesting experience. And it doesn't matter that she's Islamic, her faith is Islamic and mine is Christian. It doesn't matter because they're both the one when you actually listen. I think it's the same with all faith, all religions. I think that, number one, they're not trying to claim this is truth in the same scientific way as Stephen Fry or somebody might assert rational, logical truth. But if you recognize that logical and rational truth are only a small percentage of the way you are conscious in the world, the tip of the iceberg, if you like, and that underneath it there's this huge residue, huge kind of well of conscious perception, which is not rational, then the only way that it can find iteration or find expression is through the language of poetry. And again, by the language of poetry, I mean the language of faith. Faith is a language of poetry, but mind you, poetry in a secular world without faith seems to me that it's not poetry. It becomes a kind of propaganda for ideas, logical insights or whatever. Now, I come here because there's a silence and a solitude that you don't get if you're contacting with other people every day of the week. And when I'm in Ireland, when I'm at home, or even when I'm in Donegal, there's a beautiful interaction that makes me sane. And I would often say is something that we need desperately to go out and to reach out to other people. And if you're feeling not well or you're feeling lonely, it's fierce important in the winter particularly to reach out to other people. And you don't have to be kind of really depressed to take advantage of that. You know, you can be very, very well healthy mentally, and you can be really engaged with family. And you can have, you know, interactions with people. Maybe you have a job, maybe you go out and you mix with people during the day, but you can still be alone. And that aloneness can either be really, really good and enriching, or alternatively, it can be destructive because you feel lonely. So if you're in the latter group of loneliness, the one single cure is the single step you take when you reach out to somebody else. And it doesn't matter whether that's the most intimate person in your life, or whether it's somebody in a supermarket, or somebody you meet on the street or the pub. Reach out and you transform yourself. It's like you can grow into this bubble of isolation in your own conscious mind, and it becomes too much pressure to be like in your own head with your own voice. And no matter how intense that is, one interaction with some other person completely breaks it. One interaction I find sometimes, although not as satisfactory as humans, but one interaction with the cat, with an animal, can sometimes allow you to escape from the bubble of your own sense of self. Now, I come here for that isolation because the isolation that you experience in life sometimes is not so good, but sometimes it can be really enriching. And here's the way it goes. I came here, let's say, last Monday evening I arrived here. And I would say for about 36 hours, there is stress as a result and consequence of travelling that I'm not even aware of. But it's a time not to make quick judgments and not to be kind of overtaken by emotions. I'd be sitting here in those 24 hours and having moments of fear, like, what did I come here for? This was a mistake. The apartment is terrible. It's too cold outside. And I don't have all the comforts of home with me. So there's a way whereby in the first kind of 24 hours, 36 hours, I would feel a little bit panicky. What's happening is that I'm panicking because I'm on my own. I'm panicking because I have no choice now. I have to face into being here alone all the time for about 7 days. And that's part of the journey of the retreat. When you go on retreat and you find a place to be alone, the first 36 hours I always find are a bit stressful. And once you go through it, once your mind begins to realize that there are no choices here, that you can't just get on a plane tomorrow and go home. You're going to have to wait the 7 days and that's it. Then in a strange way, your mind then begins to change. It begins to accommodate itself to being here now in a new way. And the being here now when you're alone, and you know you're going to be alone all day, you'll be walking the streets, you'll be engaging with people at a surface level, but deep inside, you're not going to be meeting any friends, you're not going to be involved with your family in a kind of a human, deep, emotional way. Even though you see them on the screen when you FaceTime or Skype, you're looking at them on the screen, you're isolated in this solitude, which is physical. And I enjoyed that because there are parts of my consciousness that surface in that moment which never surface any other time. And that's how I find books. So this whole conversation, I suppose, is really about how I write or how I find stories. And it's about going within. It's about having places of solitude where I can come for maybe a week. I used to come for 8 weeks. It's remarkable when I look back over the past 10 years that I would come to somewhere like Warsaw. Once or twice I went to Łódź, but mostly Warsaw, and I would be here for up to 6 or 8 weeks. And that was the way that I wrote most of the books, because the clarity of perception intensified the more I'd be alone. And I come here now to do the same thing. I haven't been here since COVID. The last time I was here was 2020, in January, February. But I haven't been here since COVID, and now I'm looking at trying to write another book. All the things left unsaid, a book of letters from the coastline of Donegal, West Donegal. It's going very well, thanks be to God. It was number 1 for 3 weeks. It's number 2, number 3. It's just up there in the top 3 for the past 6 or 7 weeks. I'm so grateful, and I'm so grateful to everybody who has gone out and bought it and reading it. But I'd be a little bit ahead in my own work, so I like to focus coming up to Christmas on what's the new book. And I have loads of ideas. But those ideas will not make the book. What I do is I come away to somewhere quiet, somewhere that's a real retreat like this. An old-fashioned, dark apartment that feels like a castle, completely quiet and isolated in the old town square in Warsaw, where there's no traffic, there's no cars, it's all cobblestones, it looks medieval even though it's not medieval, because most of this was destroyed, razed to the ground by Nazi Germany in 1944. 90% of the entire city of Warsaw was razed to the ground by Nazi Germany in 1944. What an extraordinary thing to happen. And you can go to the museum here and you can watch footage that the planes took as they were flying over it after the war, showing the devastation. And it is just hard to believe the complete rubble. And the 1 million people who had lived here, just like Ukrainians, they had gone as refugees to other places in Poland. And there the city was rubble, 90% rubble. And in the years that followed, what the Warsawians did was they built it back, sometimes the way it was, exactly. And they used old medieval paintings and old ancient plans that they would find in archives of churches and old buildings and the old square. And they built it back as it was. as it was replicating, so that now when you walk through Old Town in Warsaw, it is exactly like any other old town in Europe. It's a medieval city. And yet it was rebuilt back from the rubble. And as well as that, they were doing it at a time when the Soviet system had a grip on Poland, and where faith and religious practice was not encouraged, forbidden. And so when they would be rebuilding something with Soviet cooperation, let's say one of the ordinary secular buildings in the city, they would also kind of cheat on the sort of requirements they needed, so that if they were, submitting to get so much cement or so many bricks or blocks or windows or glass or whatever, they'd always add a little bit. And the extra that they were kind of siphoning off, they were quietly rebuilding their own churches. And again, there are churches here that are so magnificent, and they're like, some of them are, one of them anyway is 12th century, a cathedral, and they're so magnificent. And yet, most of them were flattened. And between 1944 and now, they rebuilt them. So, the kind of relationship that Polish people have with faith experience and the expression of faith in the face of war, in the face of Nazi Germany, in the face of Russia's Soviet regime and the Stalinist totalitarian grip that choked Poland, their experience of faith and the expression of faith is just so very different from Ireland. And that's another reason why it's wonderful to be here, to experience Europe, which is different from the way we look at the world in Ireland. Now, I come here and I'm in this amazing, quiet, old castle of an apartment, and I'll walk the cobbled streets, and I won't have any communication with other people apart from just on the FaceTime on the laptop every so often, saying hello and, the family stuff. But there's a deep kind of solitude and isolation that is here for me. When I come, there's 36 hours where I don't like it, where I get frustrated and think, what the fuck did I do? Why did I come here? I should be at home or in Donegal or whatever. And then I'm here, and then the meditational kind of rhythm takes over, the sense that, something, you don't have any choices about being here. You're now here. You have to accommodate being here now to what is around you. And it's at that stage, for some reason, things begin to arise in my mind that are different. Perceptions surface. Stories sometimes surface. And then I find a new book. So that's me. And it's wonderful to be in Warsaw. And of course, it's kind of strangely wonderful to be present with you in this moment when I'm in this apartment on my own, and yet I'm talking to you like you're sitting beside me. I'd like to share with you a couple of stories. Right, so there you go. That's my whole explanation of being in Warsaw. And what I'd like to do now is share some more winter stories and Christmas stories for this time of year, because it's really a time where I feel storytelling is a beautiful kind of counterbalance to the long dark evenings. The price of mince pies got up me nose in a fancy bun shop on New Year's Eve. €5 for a coffee and one little pie, I said. Mince pie season is over. Do you not realise what a mince pie represents. The girl with purple eyes hadn't a clue. I said, it's an image of the manger at Bethlehem. In fact, they were once banned by a certain Mr. Cromwell, and now, after centuries of struggle to attain the freedom to eat them with devotion, you hike up the price. She said she didn't own the shop. Try the special, she said, a slice of apple tart and a tea for €3. I took her advice and sat in the corner, listening to the buzz of the world as I waited for the general. The two young women were having soup at the next table. One of them was on the phone. "I've a lot of shopping still to do," she said. "I'll be home when I'm ready." Then she hung up. "That's the way to talk to him," her friend said, and they laughed with the relish of women who enjoy telling men what to do. At another table, two men were talking about abortion with the pernickety precision of men who enjoy telling women what to do. One was blonde and magisterial, a preacher man in modern clothes. The other was a pimpled youth with greasy black hair, denim trousers, cheap shoes, and a face as derelict as the moon. "People who defy God will burn," the blonde man whispered, "including the women." I nearly choked on my apple tart as I realized he was serious. "And they will have bodies in hell," he added, "bodies that can experience pain." "Hard to imagine," said the milky boy, his face contorting as if he was constipated. "It's 3:00, the magisterial man declared, looking at his chunky gold watch. "I have an appointment." Although before he left he went to the toilet, leaving the milky-faced wretch to pay through the nose for the mince pies that they had been picking at. I was reminded of an ancient folk tale I saw satirized in an art exhibition in Paris recently, in which a young woman was being chastised by her granny. "Your hot pussy will land you in hell," the old woman screamed in the art video. "You will hang from a hook by your tongue while flames leap up and singe your thighs through all eternity." I would have enjoyed a chat with the blonde preacher about art or satire, but he looked as if he was in a hurry as he emerged from the loo, so I let the moment pass. And besides, the general had arrived in a great fluster, like a walrus in a storm. "I'm having erotic dreams," the general confessed. "Clearly it's a sign that my health is improving." I didn't want more information, but he insisted. "I've endured another winter of depression," he explained, "but I think I'm out of the woods now. I dreamt last night that I saw Sandra Bullock beside my bed in a nurse's uniform holding a syringe." "That doesn't sound very erotic," I said, and I suggested that his pyjamas might be to blame, the ones his ex-wife gave him for Christmas. "She's toying with me," he had declared on Christmas Eve, looking at the medium label on the package. "She knows bloody well I'm triple extra large." "Were you wearing those pyjamas last night?" I wondered. "As a matter of fact, I was," he admitted. "Well, that's it," I declared. "It's a well-established fact that wearing uncomfortable clothes in bed can induce disturbing dreams." The general was amazed. Then I told him about hell and the blonde preacher. I'm not surprised, he said. There's still lots of zealots out there whose deepest desire would be to see all women hanging from their tongues over the flames of hell. But tell me this, he added, has anyone ever studied the influence of pyjama bottoms on Pentecostal theology in the Irish Midlands? I confessed I didn't know. Eventually we splashed out on mince pies, those little empty mangers that Puritans once feared might turn the poor into gluttons. And suddenly the General's eyes bulged like a bull in an abattoir as a terrible thought arrested his mind. I wonder, he whispered, what kind of pyjamas the bishops favour. I said, I haven't a clue. None of us do, the General agreed. As yet, none of us do. And we both fell silent. Well, about a year earlier, I wrote from London. I was there for a funeral of a friend who emigrated as a teenager without much education and who worked with asbestos for the first 7 years of his exile before moving on to work on the buildings and manage pubs. Unfortunately, asbestos caught up with him, and so last week his children closed his coffin and laid him prematurely in the ground. That was 10 years ago. He died in hospital with an oxygen mask, his children around him and his wife standing at the doorway. But I don't think of him stretched on the cold slab of a hospital morgue. I see him as a boy playing billiards in Thurles, when he should have been doing his school homework. I see him on the boat for Holyhead, bristling with excitement, or outside a dance hall in drain-pipe trousers, or leaning over the wall on a summer's evening to chat with a 16-year-old English girl who became his lifelong companion. I see him as a boy, forever young, because, as T.S. Eliot said, we cannot bear very much reality. Although I met a man at the funeral with a 6-year-old son who didn't embroider reality when the child asked, "Where do people go when they die?" His father simply replied, "Into the ground," which is, of course, the existential reality, but sometimes I prefer the embroidery. In my mother's house there was a statue of the Virgin with Child, a perfect blue and white example of that porcelain womanhood which withered when Germaine Greer wrote The Female Eunuch. The statue stood on the bedroom mantelpiece until Mother moved to a nursing home, where she now lives happy and content. I wrote this in 2012. When I was commissioned to tidy up the house, I put the statue away in a box with holy pictures and other ornaments. But in the winter of 2012, I took the plaster Madonna out again and set her on a window ledge at the turn of the stairs, where she looks down on me as I ascend. I thought motherly love might help me through the darkest days of that winter. I hoped that the religious icon would console me, but it did not. It remained a chalky, inanimate thing, and I fretted that my faith had finally died. Except for emails. In the weeks before Christmas, I started sending emails out into the universe like prayers tossed into the grotto at Lourdes. Each day I sent messages to old friends, new friends, and people who weren't really friends at all, but just happened to be in my contacts list. It was as if in the dying days of the year I had permission to say more than I normally say. People who are depressed sometimes find that ways of unburdening themselves. Sadness is not a bad thing, I wrote to a friend, though lying in bed on a winter's day unable to do anything but weep is something most sensible people might try to avoid. Anyway, happy Christmas. To an old school friend, a girlfriend, I wrote, "Hi there, hope you're well. Haven't been in contact for a long time. I suffered some ill health during the summer, so as I sit here by the stove, I am thinking of you." I wonder what she thought of that after 30 years. To another one I wrote a few pages, summing up the past few decades of my life, and then finished with the words, "But I am talking to myself. It's more important to say I love you. You are a wonderful human being, and that's all we need to know about the existence of God." The emails were just a desperate attempt to sustain faith in something during this national depression, as 70% of the country worries about how to make ends meet in the coming year. And statues were never more than props that protected me from too much reality, though the big problem is figuring out what exactly reality is. "You're as beautiful as ever," my old friend said as he lay dying in London because he saw his wife forever young, as she was when he was selling Sunday newspapers outside the church in Hayes in 1963. On that fateful morning, she asked her mother for money to buy a newspaper, an unusual request from a teenage girl. But she got the money, and so the die was cast. She looked into his eyes, and she found her man. And he found his faith, not in a statue, but a living person that sustained him until his last breath. And I'll read you one more of these crazy meditations which appeared as columns in the Irish Times. That one was from 2012. And wait till you hear this one. "They gave me directions and off I went, down Pope's Quay and up towards Sunday's Well. The old prison is a grim monument to hard times, and it is haunted by the ghosts of the poor who were incarcerated there. People like Mary Sullivan, who got 7 years for robbing calico cloth, and Mary MacDonald, who had 6 children in her early 20s and ended up in prison just because she accosted a gentleman. And Mary Toohey, a teenager who stole a cloth cap and a few utensils from a kitchen because she wanted to get some money for her impending childbirth. When the baby was born in the prison, she was allowed 48 hours rest in the infirmary before being returned to the canvas mattress on the floor of her cell to nurse the fragile infant. By the time I staggered out of the cold stone building, I was completely depressed. So on my way back into town, I stepped into a church. There was a shop inside the door selling holy ornaments. I asked the girl behind the counter, did she have any nightlights? She pointed to a shelf of little red lamps that work on batteries. "I'll take 4 of them," I said. "Do you want them for the grave or for Christmas?" she wondered, but I didn't reply. There are some days when I find it difficult to maintain a rational view of the universe. I become overwhelmed by a desire to fall back on prayer for consolation, especially in hard times. But I didn't want to bother her with my anxieties. Instead, I paid for the lamps and fled into the church, where an old white-haired man was moving slowly down the aisle, and women on the altar were quenching the candles because a mass had just ended. Another old woman was standing before St. Anthony, her face covered with her two prayerful hands, and from her elbow dangled an eco shopping bag on which were written the words, "I am not a plastic bag." I knelt down, but I wasn't thinking of Jesus. I was thinking of a young woman I met the previous night who told me that during her transition year in secondary school, all she wanted to do was learn how to embalm the dead. So she got work experience in a morgue. After her leaving certificate, she went to art college and qualified as a teacher, but couldn't find a job. So she did an MA in phenomenology and developed a philosophical mind. But finally, she returned to her first love, the prep room of a funeral parlour, where, among other things, she now drains the blood out of dead people and fills them with chemicals as she reflects on the ultimate nature of reality. She had black hair and mascara and black clothes, and she was holding a mug of coffee as we spoke, and I couldn't take my eyes off her fingers. That night I was still thinking about her as I clicked my battery candle on and watched the little red flicker in the dark, and the thought occurred to me that Christianity wouldn't have got off the ground if it were not for women who went out to the grave on that famous morning with their spices to treat the body of Jesus. Well, what can I say about the irrational nature of my mind when I picked those three readings, which are from 10 years ago? You can get the flavour of many things of the time, the kind of panic that everybody was in 2012 in relation to the economy, would it ever recover? But you can also get a sense of how dark the world was for me at that time, because it was in 2011, 2012, 2013 that I would have experienced an intense bout of depression. A depression that kind of wrecked me, left me that I couldn't leave the room, my bedroom, and feeling a complete and utter failure in life. And that's 10 years ago. And I don't think that I would be able to write that story now, because I wouldn't be able to find two people in a restaurant, two men talking like that about morality. And what gives me hope, therefore, in that is the same thing that makes me hopeful for the future, and that is the sense that there's a strange way whereby, even though dark things happen, the evolution of the human world and the cosmos in general seems to me to be positive. I'm now 69, and people, when they get over 50, start to get sort of strangely worried about the next generation, as if the next generation were going to make big mistakes and they wouldn't do things right. People of my age always kind of falling into the trap of not having faith in young people. Now, it's funny that should be a controversial thing to say, and I wouldn't say anything more explicit about any particular issue that young people have at the moment. All I would say is this: I trust young people. I believe that young people carry the kind of light of heaven. They carry the wisdom of the ages within them. They are the face of God. They are the revelation of God in human terms. And they will work it out. They will work everything out. And all will be well. And all manner of things will be well. I believe that. And when people have conversations around me and they're all kind of worried about like new trends or new things that are happening or how young people are behaving nowadays or whatever, I just smile because I say to myself, young people will work things out and they will work it out in the right way. You know, if you kind of get to a point where you believe in God, where you believe that in some sense you're like the wave, but you're not the ocean. And then you come to that awakening moment where you realize, I am the wave, but no, I am just the expression of the ocean. When you come to a point where you feel that you are floating on a kind of an energy that is not actually your ego, it's deeper, it's higher, it's beyond your conscious ego, and yet it holds you and is here and is revealing, is showing itself through you. A sense of rapport and balance with the flowers and the animals and the humans that are around you. When you get to that stage, and if that's the stage you're reaching for, how could you be worried about the new generation? Because if you trust that God is holding you up, you think you forgot about the next generation? No. And no matter how confusing young people seem to me at 69 years of age, I relish it. I laugh, I relax. I think, how beautiful to be challenged by new ideas from young people. Because it's all a sign that revelation continues. God's unfolding mystery that we call time and space, in which everything is about love. And every unfolding of the universe is about love. No matter if it happens in Auschwitz, or no matter if it happens in the darkest concentration camps, prison camps, war fields, wherever, these are dark and evil spaces. But even within them, the real heart of those stories is the story of love and compassion, as a counterpoint to the darkness, just as a light is a complete counterpoint to the darkness. I love the song of Simeon at this time of year. The old man sees Mary come to the temple with her baby, and the song is, "At last, all powerful Master, you may let your servant go in peace, for my eyes have seen the salvation of the world, the light to enlighten the Gentiles and give glory to Israel, your people." I may have quoted it wrongly there, like I don't remember it exactly, but it's the old man seeing the young child and thinking, I die happy because I see the salvation of the world in that child. I find that is a beautiful template for dealing with all children, all young people, and if you're my age, over 60, everybody under 40. The process of getting over my own anxieties that I don't really understand where they're coming from, I don't understand their values, I don't understand their ideas. That's okay because their consciousness is completely different from mine. I mean, they were born, young people now were born into a digital age, a digital cosmos. They have no memory of the world before digital communications. Whereas 90% of my experience and memory is about life before digital experience. That's a difference between diametrically opposed opposites, different planets we're on from young people. So I get over all that sense of worrying about young people, and I think with the model and the template of faith. And if I bring the template of faith to it, just look at what it does. My faith tells me that here I am in the solitude of Warsaw, in this ghostly apartment, beautiful apartment, old castle of a building, and I'm here alone. And it's like I begin to feel that I'm not even in control of being here, that in some sense destiny brought me here, that in some sense I'm enfolded in a kind of a motherly love. There's a kind of a caring, loving ground of being, God in the universe, that is holding me and wants me to be awake in this moment and wants me to respond lovingly in this moment, in this solitude. So I believe that. How could I be daft enough to think that the same great cosmic almighty God would not be working with young people and collaborating with them, even if I don't understand how he's doing it? On this wintry and cold December day. And thank you for being here. I will turn off the microphone and return to the solitude. Bye-bye.